Lesson 8F, Nerve Impulse Propagation or Saltatory Impulse Transmission. In earlier lessons, we learned that nerve impulses move from dendrite to axon along a neuron. As you can see, this is ideal as it would allow for nerve impulses to travel in an orderly direction from receptor neuron to interneuron to the motor neuron. If nerve impulses were able to travel in any direction along a neuron, it would potentially cause a lot of nervous issues, as impulses radiated in any which direction. This feat of direction-specific nerve impulse propagation begins with the fact that only sensory neurons can detect stimuli. Their specialized sensory receptors on their dendritic arms detect stimuli and will create an electrochemical impulse if threshold is achieved. Interneurons and motor neurons do not have any sort of specialized sensory receptors to detect stimuli to create an action potential. The impulse is carried down the dendrite to the axon in a single direction, with the membrane becoming depolarized, repolarized, and then reset as a wave. This is achieved because of two factors. First is the systematic opening and closing of voltage-gated sodium and potassium channels down the neuron. When sodium gates are closing at one point, sodium gates are just starting to open downstream of the neuron. This allows for the action potential to travel like a wave down the neuron. The second factor is the refractory period, which prevents an action potential occurring immediately once the membrane has repolarized. Rather, the neuron must be reset during the refractory period, where sodium ions and potassium ions are returned to their correct sides using sodium-potassium pumps. This prevents an action potential from going backwards from where it came from, and again drives the nerve impulse in one direction. Myelinated neurons have the benefit of speeding up an action potential by having action potentials only occur at the small stretches of unmyelinated neuron called the nodes of Ranvier. This effectively allows the action potential to jump along the neuron from dendrite to axon, speeding up the transmission of an impulse by 10 to 15 times. A larger stimulus, such as a cut versus a scratch, may feel much stronger. However, this is not the pain neuron firing more greatly, since neurons creating impulses are all or none. Rather, the greater sensation of pain is likely due to more pain neurons firing at one time, or the neuron firing many times in succession.
An action potential, depicted as a red band, is propagated in one direction along the axon. During an action potential, the inside of the cell membrane becomes positive with respect to the outside. An action potential generates local currents that tend to depolarize the membrane immediately adjacent to the action potential. When depolarization caused by the local currents reaches threshold, a new action potential is produced adjacent to the original one. Action potential propagation occurs in one direction because the recently depolarized area of the membrane is in absolute refractory period and cannot generate an action potential.